this, this tender. What Sorry. What I would be doing basically if I was going to be bidding for this, and I support a lot of companies that are going through these tender processes. So I have worked on the buying side for a long time, so I know what the buyer's looking for. But I have also walked in these shoes, so and I do understand some of the frustrations that can arise from that. So I am going to assume that everyone has registered on PCS. If you've not, basically what you would do is go to the front page of Public Contract Scotland and you would click the button to register as a supplier, and it's fairly straightforward in terms of that registration. You're just putting in your company information, but I'm going to assume that everybody is, so I'm just going to show you how to find a notice. I'm not going to find the notice that you're interested in because I've already registered interest in it, so it wouldn't let me show you what you then need to do. So I'm just actually going to pick one. But if we can pretend that we've found this tender opportunity for the Borders Council in this list. So you would either do that by, if you knew the name of the framework, if you knew the buyer's name, you could type that into the search part and it would come up into this list. And I'm just actually going to pick one. Oh, I found one that was definitely happening on Public Contract Scotland, and there's been so many now since earlier today. So let me just find, I think it was this one. So if we pretend this provision for the hologram protection unit is obviously nothing to do with what you guys do, but we'll pretend this is the Scottish Borders tender and only for this part of it, and then we'll go into the actual one. So you would just click on that, and then that's going to open in a new tab. So let me just make sure I'm sharing that. And what you'll see there is you'll see a basic information within the introduction, and there's another tab that's called full notice text. That just gives you a bit of background information on the tender, and then you decide if you think that sounds good to you or something that you were interested in. And we're assuming this one is, so we're going to record interest now. So I would just click on that button, and that is you have, and then you're going to save, sorry, and you have now registered your interest in that particular tender. So what that then does is that gives you access to all the documents. It gives you access to the post box and the Q&A functionality within the notice. So I'm just going to show you then where you would find that now that you've registered interest, and we'll go into the actual one this time. So in the suppliers area, if we click on that, you can then see under my notices, you go into your interest list. And once you're in there, you would be able to find the particular tender that you had noted interest in. So we're now going to actually go into the subcontractor services for Scottish Borders Council. And if we just click into that, there's a lot of clicking on this website. I wouldn't say it can be a little clunky at times. I know that they're thinking about updating it at some point. But if we go into this notice, you can see here the tender deadline date for this is the 17th of November. So that is a really important date for you to keep in mind. And it's at 12 o'clock. So if you finish your tender submission at 12:01 on that date and try and submit it, it will not allow you to do that. So it must be submitted by that deadline. You've got the full text that you already had, but what you now have access to is this documents tab, and this is where you find all the documents that relate to this particular tender. So it's going to tell you here what is it that they are looking for, what are the things that they need you to send back to them as part of your tender submission, and how they're going to evaluate your tender response. We'll go into some of these documents. Before we do that, I just also wanted to highlight this Q&A functionality. And if you're in here already, you'll have seen the questions and answers coming through. But within this Q&A, you have got the opportunity to ask a question. So you can see the button here, ask a new question, and then it's just a free text box. When you submit your question, the buyer doesn't know that it was you that submitted the question. So it's anonymous in Public Contract Scotland. In some of the other portals, it's not. So just be aware of that. But it's anonymous here. And they basically get a notification that someone has asked a question, and then they answer the question. And you'll see from this, there's questions that other people have asked. So whenever they answer your question, the response goes to everyone that's registered interest. So the reason for that is for transparency purposes, so that everybody that's bidding has got the same information. So if they were answering people's questions privately, you might not have the same information as the next person, and that could be seen that they were at an advantage. So all the answers get replied to, and it goes to everyone. It does say when you're submitting the question, please don't include anything that's commercially sensitive or that identifies you as the person asking the question. So it does prompt you on that. If you did ask something that was commercially sensitive, the buyer does have the option to discard the question, and they can give a reason for that. So basically, they would discard it and they would explain why they're not doing that, because they don't want everybody to see that answer, basically. So I would suggest that if you've just downloaded the documents, make yourself familiar with this Q&A, because there'll be questions maybe that you would come up with when you read the documents that someone's already asked. And then there might be questions that you want to ask as well. You can download the answers, so sometimes people need to do that to send it to other people within their organisation that are working on the tender. You do get an email notification every time the buyer answers a new question, so you should be aware of that, and it'll just say there's been a new question answered, and you would click through. But you can always come to this tab, and that's the most up-to-date list of questions and answers. I would really encourage you to use this facility. If there's anything at all that you're not clear about within the tender, please do use it. It's there for a reason. And it's really important that you understand what you're bidding for and what the expectations are of you. So if anything at all is unclear, jump over there and ask the Q&A. So I'm just going to go through some of the sort of key documents. I'm not going to go through obviously every single document word for word, but I am going to just show you some of the key things that you would want to pick out. So unfortunately, this is not able to be shared in a very good way for some reason, but this would be the first document that I would suggest that you look at. So this is the tender information and the instructions. So this is going to tell you all about what is it basically that they are looking for, what is the timescale for the project, and also what information you need to provide to be considered. So you can see here quite clearly at the very front, we've got that deadline date again. You need to have that etched in your brain. And I'm just going to flick through to some of the key pages. As I say, I don't know why it's in such an awkward format, but hopefully we can work with it. Hopefully most of you have seen this already, but I'm just wanting to pick out some key parts. So let me scroll down. I don't know how well you can see that. It looks quite small to me. There might be a way to zoom in. Do you know, Fran, if people can zoom in?
Yes, at the top of the screen. So you're looking at a Word doc just now, and just above that, you'll see I'm sitting at 100%, but there's a plus and minus if you're sitting at less or more than 100%, but feel free to sort it out so that you can view it clearly. Thanks, Mandy.
So this document, it's giving you basically a summary of what it is that they are looking for. So what geographical areas that it's split down into. And then if we keep going down, it explains that this framework is going to run for 4 years, and the estimated value of the framework is £25 million. Within the Q&A, there was a few questions at least about, was there a breakdown of the value for each lot in terms of the specialisms, and there wasn't, but they have now provided that. So if you look at the Q&A, if you look at the list of documents, there's now a document in there that breaks down the estimated value. They always caveat that to say that you're not guaranteed any value of work, but I think that just gives a bit of a better understanding in terms of what is the opportunity that's available. So we've got the timetable. Obviously, the really key date is, when do you need to submit your tender by? We've already said that's the 17th of November. The other date that's of interest is the 10th of November. That's when the Q&A closes. So if you've got any questions that you want to submit, you need to do that by, I think it's Monday next week at 5 p.m, the 10th of November. So after that date, you can't ask any questions. It won't allow you to submit a question in relation to this tender. So please make sure that you submit your questions before then. It gives you some general information, things like data protection and FOI, some of the priorities that the Council has in terms of sustainable procurement and fair work practices. That's all quite standard stuff. They're communicating to you things that are important to them. I'm not saying just skip over them, do read it, but we don't need to go into that today. But the really important bit you want to get into is the tender instructions. So basically, how do you submit a tender and what information is required of you? So if we go, just scroll down a little bit, sorry, I'm just trying to pick out some key stuff. So they're saying they're going to be using the Public Contract Scotland website, which is what we're going to look at today. That's how they are going to receive your tender submission. Once that deadline has passed, as I've said before, you will not be able to make a submission. It's set up in a way that doesn't allow you to do that. The other thing to say is that when you've submitted your response, they can't open that until that deadline closes. So a couple of companies have asked me that recently, as if I submit it too early, is that a bad thing? Would they be able to look at what I've put in there? No, they can't. So they can see that they've received a response, but they can't see who sent the response, and they can't open it until the deadline is passed. They're mentioning here about the questions and clarifications. That's important. And then also, if they make any changes to the tender document, what their process is for that, basically. 3.14, the tender evaluation process. So they're explaining basically how they're going to evaluate things. So it's broken down into different stages. So they've got the selection stage, and that's where they're going to determine that you meet the minimum criteria, basically, that you're suitable, that you've got capacity, and that you've got the capability to deliver the types of works that are covered under the lot that you're bidding for. And then the award stage looks at your quality response and also the price criteria. So they'll do the selection bit first, and anybody that doesn't pass that is not evaluated any further. If you pass that stage, you're then going to be evaluated against the award criteria, and that is basically scored. And the decision in terms of who is awarded onto that framework is based on the number of points that you score in that. So it then goes a little bit further into what the selection criteria and evaluation criteria, are. I'm not going to go into these in detail because we'll go through some of these as we progress through the PCS portal. But there's some information only parts. So that's information about you, your company, general information. There is then pass or fail criteria. So what the public sector has is something called exclusion grounds. So there's mandatory exclusion grounds where if you said yes to something, they have to exclude you from that process. So that's all the really dodgy stuff like conspiracy and corruption and terrorism. If you say that you've been involved in any of those things, they have to exclude you from that process. They also have discretionary grounds for exclusion. So that is where you might say, yes, that you have been involved in that thing, or in relation to tax, you might say you've not paid your taxes as you should have, but there is there's an opportunity for you to say how you've rectified that situation, and they can then decide if they want to accept that and you're still a suitable candidate, or if they want to exclude you. So basically they can make a decision on that one. So if you said, for example, if you said, I've not paid all my taxes as I should have, there would then pop up a little question box that would allow you to explain that, what you've done to rectify that situation moving forward, and then they would decide what the outcome of that would be. So then just moving on to like some of the suitability criteria. So we've got the SSIP accreditation, or you can agree to comply with the Council's control of contractors policy. So that's their suitability criteria. We've then got economic and financial standing, so that's your insurances, and also they're going to do this credit safe check against you to make sure that you're a financially viable company. We then go on to technical and professional ability. So that is around your environmental management system, climate change plan, and subcontracting. And we'll go through some of that when we look at the in the portal. And then quality assurance, that you've got relevant quality assurance processes in place, and environmental management again. So those are all part of that selection stage. So you have to pass that stage to then be considered to move forward into the actual tender evaluation scoring part. And then it explains what the criteria are for the quality criteria. So we've got service delivery, which is 30%. It's obviously really important to them. We also have implementation, which is 30%. So these are like the key big areas that they really want to focus on. We've got continuous improvement, adverse weather conditions, both at 10%, and communication at 15%. And then we've got the fair work first, including the living wage at 5%. So that's basically what they're going to score you against as your response to these questions. And that is how they're going to decide what the outcome is. And then they explain to you how they're going to score it. So they're going to use this 0 to 4 scoring evaluation methodology. This information is really important because you need to understand what is it that's important to them. So how are they going to decide the outcome? And the scoring methodology is really helpful when you're putting together your bid, because what I would suggest you do is, when you've written your responses, come back to this and pretend you're the buyer, score your responses against that 0 to 4 methodology. And then that's going to help you to say, right, okay, do we think we're sitting at a 4? That's where you really want to be at. Or what are the things that are stopping it from being a 4? And are these things that could be addressed before the tender's submitted? The next part is the pricing criteria and evaluation. So they're explaining how they're going to evaluate that. And, you know, as I say, this is important for you to know, because you want to know how they're going to evaluate it and what you should be focusing your attention on. But also, when the tender outcome is known, you want to be able to see, how did they score it? How did you score against the criteria? Do you agree with the scoring? Is it something you want to challenge? Or is it something that you can learn from next time and improve on for future tenders? So that gives you sort of all the basic information that you need to be able to understand what to submit. Sorry. And then the other really helpful thing that they've provided which is really nice when they do this, because not everyone does, is, I'll just share the next tab. They've actually provided a supplier document, which is really helpful, because now you've got something that you can refer back to make sure that you've filled everything in and submitted it. So that is something that you want to have a look at. And as you go through the SPD document, which we'll look at, some of this stuff will become apparent there, but you want to be providing all of this documentation. So some of this is things that you need to provide, so likes of your insurance documents, you would need to provide that information, and some of it is documents that they've provided that you need to complete. So, for example, the Declaration of Non-Involvement in Serious and Organised Crime, that is a template, just share that, that they have provided that you need to complete. So basically, what you have to do with that, if I just can scroll to the bottom, sorry, it's a little bit slow, is you need to make a declaration that you have read over this and that you've got nothing to report, and that basically it's saying that they can go away and check into your company. So that is one of the documents that you need to complete. And I'll just jump back to the list. So I would definitely use this list as like your starting point of, here is all the things that we need to fill in, and some of them are just things that need to be signed. So the declarations, the forms, the declarations, the serious and organised crime, the freedom of information, generally you're going into those, you're ticking boxes, you're filling in information about your company, and you're signing them where relevant. So I would suggest that you do those as soon as possible, because once they're done, that's it, and you don't want to forget about them at the end. But just continually refer back to this, sorry, I cannot speak today, this template, just to make sure that you've completed everything that you have been asked to complete. And then what I'm going to do now is just go back into Public Contracts Scotland, and I'm going to show you how you would go to the post box. So once you've registered your interest and you've got access to the documents in the Q&A, there is a button that says go to post box. So you're going to click onto that, and it takes a little while to open, and we're just going to find, so it's at the top, Subcontractor Services Framework Agreement. It shows that it's not been dispatched yet because we've not submitted it, and it gives you the opportunity to edit that. So if I just click into here, what you have to do when you're submitting your response is, you can see this SPD response button here. So that is inbuilt into the system. You have to go into that and you have to answer the questions in there, and you have to then lock that. You cannot submit your response if you've not done that. So I would suggest that that's the first thing that you do. You can do all those declarations and stuff maybe, and then go into here and actually fill that in and make sure you've completed everything on there, and then lock it. Because as I say, if you've not locked it, it then won't let you submit your bid. And I have seen companies where they've filled it in, but they've just not locked it, and they've done all the other bits that they need to do. They've uploaded everything else, but because they were like a minute to the deadline, they weren't able to actually submit their response. So all that work was lost. And one of the companies was actually an incumbent as well. So it was very stressful for them. So you're going to complete the, yeah.
Sorry, did you notice if it was a wet signature or an electronic signature on the document?
Let me look at one of them and just see. Print name, signature. I don't know, but I'll check that,
We'll get
because
this.
it
Yeah,
normally
thank you.
tells us. Yeah, most people now accept electronic signatures, but there are some tenders where they do require an actual signature. So let's check that.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, someone said, how do you sign them? Right, that's fine. Right, let me just find my page again. So what you're going to do when you're submitting your response is you need to complete this SPD response, and we'll go into that and see what that looks like. And then everything else that you need to submit, so your pricing schedule, your quality response, all of those forms, the insurance documents, all of that stuff is going to be uploaded here, and it's a very basic file upload. It's exactly the same as you would do if you were adding a file to an email. You just choose the file, upload it and add it, and then it would appear under this bit here that says attached documents. And then that is basically what you do to submit your tender response. So I'll go in to the SPD response and we'll just have a look at that. And as I said, it's a bit slow. So sometimes it takes a wee minute to just go into it. It's not showing a little. So it's that generate SPD response. There we go. So as I said, make sure you do this early on in the process and get it locked. The important thing is to lock it. And that means that you'll then be able to submit all the other stuff. And if you don't, you can't do that. So it comes up with some information just about the authority, what is the procurement procedure, your company details, and the representative details. If you've never done this before, you might have to fill some of this stuff in, but that's the basic information about your company. So if you've not done it before, you might need to fill some of this stuff in. And it basically talks you through. You're just clicking next and it tells you what you need to do next. So it's quite user friendly, I would say. And then we'll get into the actual body of the single procurement document. And again, it's slow, as you can see. It always seems to take a while to get into this SPD response. So as you can see, there's 4 tabs here. The first tab, again, is just information about the tender itself. And then you've got information about the lots. So you can see here, and for some reason, it seems to select that first lot on the list automatically. So if you're not bidding for groundworks and hard landscaping, just make sure that you untick that. It would become apparent to the bidder once they were reviewing the rest of your tender, but just make sure you untick that. So you're basically going to tick what lots it is that you're bidding for, what is the specialism that you're interested in, and you would tick that there. So I'll just leave that one ticked for me. And then you go into your bidder information. So if you've done a SPD response before, some of this stuff will be pre-populated already. And what you just want to do then, if that is the case, is make sure that the same information still applies. So for example, for mine, I've got one employee. You might have done a bid a few years ago and you had 10 employees and now you've got 20. So just go through and check some of the stuff, even if it is pre-populated. But if not, then you're just basically answering these questions. This section is very straightforward because it's about you and it's probably information that you already know. So are you a supported business? That would be a business that predominantly employs disabled people. Some people are not quite sure what that means. So you would say yes or no to that. I don't think there's any supported businesses here today. The official list, if you're a UK business, you would be saying not applicable to that. And then, sorry. So then it's asking things about, have you paid your social security contributions and taxes? So hopefully you're going to say yes to that. Anything where they're saying is the information available electronically, and do you want to evidence it at this point? You're just going to say no to that. In the tender, they have said, please don't upload anything within the SPD. So if you had said yes to that, it would bring you up a box where you could add that evidence, but they don't want you to do that. So you're basically just saying this information is available, and if they wanted that information, they would come back to you and ask for that. So that section is fairly self-explanatory. Down at the bottom, it's got a section where it's asking, do you rely on anybody else, any other entity, to meet the selection criteria? So that could be, there is a separate question about subcontracting, but that could be if you're using a subcontractor. So for example, I've just worked with a company recently, and one of the selection criteria was that you had to be gas safe registered. The company wasn't gas safe registered, but they were using a subcontractor to do that part of the work. So they would have to say yes to that, and they would have to give information about that company and what is it in the selection criteria that they are relying on them for. So they would be given that company's details, and they would be saying, we're relying on them for the gas safe registered part of the criteria, and here's the details. If not, you're just going to say no to that. Then it sounds like a similar question, but it's not quite. Do you intend to subcontract any of the work? So that would be even if you're not relying on them to meet the criteria, you've got all that stuff in-house, but you're still using subcontractors. So you're going to say yes or no to that. Really, really important. If you are saying yes to the reliance question, or you're saying reliance to the subcontracting question, you have to get all of those parties to complete an SPD document. So this is basically a Excel version of this that you're filling in through the SPD button. You have to get your subcontractors to complete that. So if you've not done that and you are going to be using subcontractors, I would suggest that that's something you want to contact them about ASAP, because it can be difficult to chase things up with people, and there is a version spreadsheet within the files. I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So you would need to send that to your subcontractors for them to complete. And that would need to be submitted alongside your tender application. So it might be that you're using subcontractors, and that's great. If you are, you'd need to provide this for everyone. So you really want to get onto them to do that. And you can find that, as I say, within the download files. Let me just jump back to the SPD. So once you've answered that, you're then going to move on to the next one, which is the exclusion grounds. So as I've explained already, there's mandatory exclusion grounds, and there's discretionary ones, and you are basically just saying yes or no to all of those questions. So hopefully the answer to most of them should be no, hopefully. The the only one that really wants a yes answer is the one about taxis. You want to say yes to that. I've seen some people being they've ended up saying yes to everything because they thought that's what they had to do in this section, and they've answered the tax one where they've said we've not paid our taxes and they've not meant to. So just be careful with that one. But basically, hopefully you're going to say no to all of these things. We don't want to provide the evidence at this stage, so we're just going to say no to that. If there is anything, so for example, if you had breached environmental or labour law, for example, this is one of the discretionary grounds. So you can either say no to that, which is hopefully the answer, but if you've said yes to that, what you want to then put in is what actually happened in that situation, what have you done to rectify that, and that is what we call self-cleansing response. So basically you're saying, we're cleansing ourselves of our sins. We've did this thing that we shouldn't have done, but here's what we've put in place to make sure that that doesn't happen again, and to resolve that situation. So they would then, as I said earlier, they would review that and decide, is that a good enough explanation or not? And I would encourage you to be honest on this if there is anything, because the buyer will do due diligence checks, and I have seen people answer no to these questions before, and it has then come to light that they should have answered yes to it. And what that can mean is that they can just terminate the contract with yourselves because you haven't answered it correctly at the bidder stage. They can decline to proceed with your application, or it might be a conversation around, why did that happen? But I would encourage honesty on that. So that section hopefully is fairly self-explanatory. It is mainly yes and no questions. And then we get on to the selection criteria, and this is where there's a bit more information involved. So if you're enrolled in a trade register, you would provide that information here. Within the document that sets out their requirements, they will tell you if there's any specific trade registers that you need to be involved in. So, if we take that gas safe one as an example, like you have to be gas safe registered to do that type of work. This is where you would provide your registration details. Excuse me. Sorry, I was going to sneeze there and then it never came. Sorry. They've not asked for a minimum turnover requirement, so that one is just blank. And then for economic and financial standing, they have specified certain levels of insurance that they want you to have in place. So important thing here is you can either say yes to this in terms of you've already got it, or you can say that you would commit to obtaining it prior to commencement of the contract. That's quite important, especially if you're a small business and you've not had to have these insurances in place already. They're not saying you have to do it right now. You can do it once you're awarded onto the framework, but you would have to have it in place by then. And what I would really encourage you to do is, if you're going to say yes to that, but you don't have the levels in place, please check how much it's going to cost and that you're happy with the cost of that. Because again, I have seen a company, it was professional indemnity insurance, which I think is a bit more expensive than some of the others, but they said yes, and then the insurance was very, very expensive. They didn't realise that, and it was basically meaning that that contract wasn't really worth it to them in terms of making a profit. So do check that. And then, excuse me, sorry. They're also saying here that they will carry out a credit safe check, and if your credit score rating is insufficient, they might exclude you from this process, or they might ask for further assurances. So you're basically just saying you agree to that or you don't agree to that. So you probably want to have a look at your credit safe score and see what that says. You can register with Credit Safe for a free trial. So if you've not already got access to that, that might be worth doing just to see if that would flag anything up on your credit file. And if it would, then either you might want to ask a question in the Q&A anonymously to say, this is the situation, or this is our score, would we be considered? Or you might decide that you don't want to bid for it, or you're happy to go ahead. So that's worth checking out, just to check that you would actually meet that requirement. And let me just scroll back up. So then we've got technical and professional ability. So they're asking here about environmental measures, and that is the climate change plan. So they've provided a template for the climate change plan, which we'll have a quick look over as we go forward, but they're asking for information on your environmental management measures. Excuse me. And that's all they've asked there. Sorry, it's jumping about when I try and press all the buttons. And then we've got quality assurance. So if you have got ISO 9001 certification, you tick that box already. And if you don't have that accreditation, excuse me, you have to provide information on why you don't have that in place, and also what evidence that you do have a quality management system in place. So there's some word in there that you can provide. So when it comes to health and safety, you need to provide a statement of health and safety, risk assessments, and so on. So you want to check. So if you've got the accreditation, you just tick the box anyway. If you don't have the accreditation, you want to look at what are they requiring of you, and you're going to have to pull together the evidence that you've got that in place. And then the environmental management is similar. So if you've got the 14001 accreditation, great, you tick the box. If not, you need to look at what you do have in place in relation to environmental management. And you can still say yes to that, but you would have to have the evidence available to provide to them. So that's your SPD response. That's what you would need to complete in there. And then I'm not going to be able to show you what it looks like to lock it, but basically what you would do is you're going to click save, and you can see this little button where it says save only. If you've filled in everything, if you've completed all the answers, there would be another little button which would say save and lock. So that's what you need to do. So if you try and save it and you think you've filled everything in, if you've not got that save and lock button, it means you've missed one of the questions out, or a number of the questions. So you would have to go back in and see what you've missed. But if you've completed everything, you'd be able to press that save and lock. So as I've said before, I keep saying the same thing, but please make sure you save and lock that before you get anywhere near submitting the rest of your response, because if you've not, you won't be able to do that, unfortunately. So I'm just going to jump back to the post box response, and then I'm going to go into some of the documents. Okay, bear with me. So I'm just going to go back to the checklist, and we'll look at what's required. So you've got your insurance document. So you've already said within the SPD, either you've got the insurances in place or you will put them in place. They want the evidence of that, so they want you to provide your insurance documents. So if you've got the insurances already, you would be uploading those insurance documents, and you would tick this box. If you've not, as I've said before, it's good to get a costing for that, but you can get a letter from your broker to say that you're going to put those insurances in place if successful. We've got the police declaration, which we've had a quick look at, and then I'll just go into some of the other documents. The next one is the Fair Work First, including real living wage. So we'll just have a quick look at that. So it's asking, who are you and are you a sole trader? And the reason why they ask if you're a sole trader is that you then don't have to go ahead and fill in the rest of this form. So if you're a sole trader, you're just saying yes. And then what happens is you will get a score of 2 against this requirement. So this is one of the award criteria that's worth 5%. You would get a score of 2 for that. So you would get 2.5% for that if you're a sole trader. If you're not a sole trader, you have to provide then a detailed response in relation to the Fair Work Practices and there's 7 criteria under Fair Work that you need to address, and it gives you, it talks you through those. So there's a box for each one basically that you need to respond to. There's a really good page on the Scottish Government's website that talks about what is fair work and then what does good look like. So it actually goes through each of these categories and it says, here are the things that you could put in place or have in place in your organisation that would be a good response to that. So I'll send a link to that along with the recording so that you can go into there and you can look through that. And it could be that you're already doing some of those things, but it will remind you that you can say that in your response. Or it could be things that you think, well, we could put that in place. And again, then you can add that in as your response. So you would fill this in, and this is going to be one of your documents that you're going to upload. And again, that is on that checklist. So you've got a reminder that you need to do that. The next page is the forms and declarations. So I'll just share that quickly. If anybody has any questions as we go through these, just put it in the comments. That's fine. So we've got forms and declarations, and these are fairly self-explanatory. It's basically things that you need to tick or sign or agree to, and that is the form of tender declaration. So, and that you've not been involved in any collusion. So they're fairly self-explanatory, but sometimes these are the things that people forget to do. So it's good that they've provided the checklist. I think that you can make sure that you fill that in. The next form, I won't go into this one actually because it's self-explanatory again. Freedom of information. So basically it allows you to say anything that you would consider to be commercially sensitive that you don't want to be disclosed if somebody made a freedom of information request. I would say it's probably not worth the paper it's written on, to be honest, because if the Information Commissioner decided that the information should be released, they will release it anyway, even if you've said that you don't want it to be released. So there is, they're not going to release things like your pricing, for example. That would be legitimately classed as commercially sensitive information. So most people just sign that form and don't write anything on it. If there was something that you thought was really, really commercially sensitive that would disadvantage you if your competitors knew about it, then you can write it on that form. So the next thing that we need to complete is the climate change plan. So I'm just going to go into that. And this is something that the Scottish Government is encouraging all public bodies to use. There's obviously a big focus on carbon net zero. The Scottish Government and all the relevant bodies have got their own targets and stuff on that. So what they're looking to do is they're looking for their providers to also have targets and taken action on that. So they've provided the more basic version of the climate change plan. So they're not asking you at this stage to give data or details of what your carbon output is, but they want to know what are the things within your organisation or in the nature of your operations that are generating carbon emissions, and what are the things that you're doing to try and reduce that. So it gives you different things to think about, fuel, electricity, heat, all of the things that you might be using that would generate carbon output, and then they want to know basically what are your targets to reduce that. So that's something you'll need to have a think about as a business. It might be something that you're already working on at the moment and you've got targets set out, great. If not, I would suggest that you want to just go through these categories and think about what are the things that we could implement. And it doesn't have to be really fancy things that cost a lot of money. So for example, one of the classic things would be we've got electric vehicles, for example. But that's not going to be something that's within reach for everyone at this point in time. So what are the other simple things that you can do within those categories. So, you know, even if you can't put electric vehicles in, could you look at being more fuel efficient? Could you plan your job routes better? And how could you start to capture some of that information on what was the carbon output when you started, and then when you put these improvements in place, how is that reduced? So don't overthink it. I would say just keep it simple. Really, like, look at these categories. So fuel, for example, and think about where are we using fuel, how much fuel are we using, and how could that be reduced in the future. The same with electricity, and all those things. So keep it as simple, but I think what they really want to see is that you're making some sort of move towards reducing your carbon emissions, basically. So it's giving some thought to it, and not just saying things to tick a box, but really thinking about how could we reduce this moving forward. Just checking what's next on the checklist. So the quality response. This is something that is going to take up probably most of your time when you're doing your submission, and this is the bit where you're going to get the points, basically. So it sets out what the different questions are, and it gives you a word count that you need to comply with in relation to that response. So the first question is about service delivery. How are you going to make sure that the quality of service is delivered? And this should include qualified personnel and plant operators. So what you want to do is you want to break down that question and think about um, how you're going to respond to that. So you want to get across in that response why they should pick you. What is it that's good about your organisation that tells them that you can do this type of work? How do you make sure that a quality service is delivered? So what you would want to talk about here would be that you've got qualified personnel, and you would want to talk a wee bit maybe about who are those personnel and what experience do they have and what qualifications that they have. And then also, how are you making sure that the work that's undertaken is of a suitable quality? So that would be about your quality control procedures, and that quality management thing that we've spoken about before. I would suggest that you think about evidence and any claims that you make. So you're going to talk about what you're going to do for them. You want to talk about how you're solving their problem. How will you deliver a good service for Borders Council? But if you can support that with evidence of what you're already doing for existing clients, that's really helpful. So, you know, for example, you might want to say, this is the staff that we've got, and here's some of the things that they've worked on in the past that are relevant. So you're not just saying we've got good people, you're saying we've got good people, but here's some of the things that they've been involved in. Continuous improvement. So how are you going to apply continuous improvement, making sure that the level and the quality of your workmanship is good and customer relations are good? So you're going to talk about what you would implement here for Borders Council to make sure that that is happening. And again, you can use examples from previous clients to say, this is what we're going to put in place, and we've done this here, and this is the benefit that it's had. So it could be, when it's about things like customer relations, it could be you've got customer satisfaction data that you could include within your response to show that you're getting that right. And again, there's a word count for that. Adverse weather conditions. So how are you going to complete the works in the face of adverse weather? So that would be looking at what you're going to put in place for them, what is your adverse weather policies, and then you might want to put in some examples of where there has been adverse weather in the past and how you've handled that situation. Communication, what is your communication process, and how are you going to work collaboratively with the council and the other partners. So again, that would be around, who's going to manage the contract, who's the key personnel, how are you going to keep in regular contact, what does that communication look like? Implementation, so how are you actually going to mobilise this? So again, you want to talk about how you're going to do it for them, but also you might want to touch on how that mobilisation process has worked for other people in the past. And the Fair Work First one we've already covered. That's the separate template. So we don't have to go over that. So that's your quality submission. And that is, as I've said, that is the main bulk of what you're going to get points for within the tender. So this is the bit really that you should be paying the most attention to. I would always refer back to that scoring methodology that we looked at. So once you've written your responses here, go back to that evaluation methodology and score it yourself to say, is that a 4 at the moment, or are there gaps? What do we need to do to fill those gaps so that we get the most points available to us? The other thing that I like to do is I like to apply the so what test. So when I'm reviewing a client's response, I will do that scoring part, but I will also go through it, and anything that they've said that they've claimed that they do, um, I'm going to say so what to that, and it sounds a little bit rude, but it's like a lot of bidders will describe the functionality of what they do, but they don't necessarily relate that to how that's going to benefit the client. So that's quite a useful exercise to do as well. Go through your submission and just think like, so what? So if you're telling me that you do X, Y, Z, so what benefit does that then bring to your clients? And just try and incorporate that moving forward. Right, I'm just going to jump back to the list and check what else we need to look at. So I'll just share that actually. So the SSIP certificates, if applicable, so you would need to upload them. Your health and safety policy and a minimum of 3 risk assessments, if applicable. So again, you would have to upload those. That's something that's covered within that quality management part within the SPD. So you would need to have a look at that and see, do you need to provide that information, and what is exactly is the information that you need to provide. You need an SPD for every subcontractor. So we've spoken about that already, and I've showed you what that looks like, but you would need to make sure that you do that. Evidence relating to quality management, again, that's covered in the SPD, and as is the environmental standards. So this is all the stuff that you would need to compile in order to be able to submit your response. And then the final thing, which is actually not on their checklist at all, but it's maybe just obvious that you need to complete it. The final thing is the price schedule that you need to. Oh, sorry, I don't know why that's something's popped up there. Right, sorry, I'm just trying to open that up. So the price schedule is obviously a key part of the evaluation as well. So you're providing your basic company information. That's just so that they know whose price schedule it is. In the SPD, you've selected the lots that you're going for. So you've selected what your specialism is. But now within the pricing schedule, you can say what areas you want to cover. So that's just a tick box. And basically that means that they know who they're evaluating for each area. There's a bit of guidance within the pricing schedule, so they're explaining that they are interested in the labour rate. That's what they're going to evaluate the price on. That's the only thing that they're going to take into consideration on price at this stage. The other things that would be relevant if you were doing an actual job would be, what is your materials markup? I think there's a bit somewhere about plant hire, or there was questions on that, but those would all be calculated when you were actually bidding to do a job, so they're not evaluating that at this stage. I know there's been quite a lot of questions on that, so the only thing they're going to evaluate just now is your labour rate. excuse me. So then if we just jump into the pricing schedule itself, and it's literally a labour rate for the lot that you're bidding for. And then the non-evaluated stuff they're asking about is your call-out charges, etc. So that those things would be applied. They would want you to apply that call-out charge that you've said in here, if you were then going to be doing an actual job. But that stuff would be calculated at the time where the job was actually happening. So that's everything that you need to complete, and then I'm just going to jump back into Public Contracts Scotland and just show you exactly what you then need to do. So you've completed your SPD response, and once you've locked that, it says something different. I think it says edit SPD. No, it says that just now. Can't remember what it says. It says something different. But you want to make sure you've locked that. I know I've said that about a million times, but you need to do that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to upload these files that we've just looked at. Everything that's on that checklist, basically, you're going to upload to that into here. So I'll just show you very quickly. I'm sure all of you are familiar with how to upload files, but I'll just show you what it looks like once you've done that. Bear with me. So I'll just pick any file. Again, it's a bit slow. Don't think it's gonna. Right, so that's added the file. You can just give the file a name. It doesn't really matter what that name is, to be honest, because they can see the file name anyway. And then once you've uploaded that's going to attach the documents list. And I'll just show you what that looks like. So you can now see that you've uploaded that document. So basically what you're going to want to do is upload all those documents and then look back at that checklist and make sure that every single document that's listed there is here. If you need to replace documents or delete them, you can just delete it and add the updated one. And then once you've finished and you know that you've definitely done everything, you're just going to click this button which says dispatch. It's not going to let me do it because I've not done the SPD, but you would just click dispatch, and then that means that your submission basically gets sent to the buyer. As I've said already, they can't open it until the closing date. You do have an option if you've submitted it and then you want to change something, you can come back in and the button, I can't remember what it says, but it's different. You can edit your response and resubmit it. But hopefully you don't have to do that, but you can do that right up till the deadline if you need to. And that's pretty much it. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So I'm hoping there's maybe some questions or something that I can help with. Beyond that, I hope that